Siemens, we talk about technology with a purpose. And we believe that digitalization is one of those core technologies that has a number of impacts, and sustainability is very clearly one of them. But we also talk sustainability more broadly. We talk planetary, we talk governance, but we also talk people, and we get very engaged from a diversity, equity, and inclusion perspective.
Cuenta con más de 2 décadas de experiencia internacional en campos de recursos humanos. Fue vicepresidenta de Personas y Organización en el grupo alimentario estadounidense Marx Inc. y actualmente es directora de Recursos Humanos de DMS. Cuenta con estudios de economía por la Escuela Internacional de Economía de Rotterdam y por la Universidad de Duisburg en Alemania. También cuenta con un MBA en las áreas de recursos humanos y economía. La directora de Capital Humano y de la Oficina de Sustentabilidad de Siemens AG, Judith Wiese, en Milenio Negocios.
Muy buenas noches, bienvenidos a Milenio Negocios, este programa que hacemos Ilana Sod y yo, hoy con Judith Wiese, directora general de Personas y Sustentabilidad de Siemens AG. And I want to begin with my first question, Judith. Thank you for being with us. Today, climate change is a must in companies' strategies, plans, and the business itself. How can a company be a contributor of productivity and sustainability at the same time?
I think that's the million-dollar question, huh? Because for the longest time, sustainability was perceived as something that sits on the side, is corporate social responsibility, costs money, or is just a nice to have. I think increasingly people understand that sustainability can and should be sitting squarely into how business is done. And when I think about Siemens, then we think about sustainability in a number of different buckets, if you like. There is what we do in our own operations, and where we simply have to take our responsibilities as a responsible enterprise. And this is where we look at our own emissions, for example, and where we have very clear roadmaps into how we do that. Then you go into supply chains, where typically, and so also in our case, the number of or the carbon footprint is much higher than what we actually have as an industry that is not particularly highly emitting. But this is where you then get to a 10-fold, a 20-fold in terms of things like carbon footprint, and where we're working with our supplier base to do that. Now, where it gets really interesting is when we then look to our customer side. And this is where I think we get to a sweet spot of how decarbonization, but also resource efficiency, these two things are actually aided by technology that we have to offer. And digitalization is one of the key technologies to help industries, industrial operations, buildings, grids, mobility decarbonize and become more resource efficient. And of course, whilst doing that, there is productivity gains also to be had. And the more expensive the real price for energy becomes, when we start to look at the real price for products, when you factor in all the externalities, then it becomes a real business opportunity. And maybe two final thoughts on this first question. One is, why are the capital markets increasingly getting interested? Because they see that the cost of doing nothing from a sustainability perspective with floods and other disasters around the world is actually much higher than the money that needs to be invested to become more sustainable. And then we have people there, whether they're consumers or whether they are people who would choose their employers. For them, it is much more important. So if you're competing in a tight talent market, if you want to be marketable to your consumers, it becomes a business imperative as well as a business opportunity at the same time.
I wanted to ask you, what is Siemens technology role supporting cities to become more sustainable?
Yeah, when you think about it, cities obviously are made up of buildings, the need to move from left to right. And if you think about how much cities and metropolitan areas will grow also with a view to 2050. There is research that would suggest that an astonishing amount of New York cities every 10 days will appear in the next 20 years. So the vast majority of people will live in big cities. And so therefore it is really important that we manage coherently really well how that plays out, both in terms of quality of life, but then of course also from a sustainability perspective. And where do companies like Siemens again play a role here? If you think about buildings, 40% of energy is consumed by buildings today, in certain geographies even more. Typically 50% of that goes wasted. Now, so there's huge opportunities here in terms of energy efficiency and how that is managed. If you think about the fact that for the developed world, we typically spend 90% of our time indoors. So things like air quality and indoor climate and how we actually build surroundings so that buildings become good places for people to play a role. And here again, Siemens has some technology to offer in that regard. So those are things where I believe technology again plays a huge role in making cities more livable places and places for people, and at the same time making sure that we don't exploit the planet to an extent that is not sustainable going forward.
I wanted to ask you about the future of work. The future of work requires new skills. And in a company like Siemens, what are these skills?
So one of the things that we have found is that we can trust our people. No? And some needed a pandemic to find that out. Luckily, the majority did not. But the wonderful thing is that we've shifted, I think, from a leadership paradigm of you need to be present, and when you're present, I see that you're working, and I believe that you're producing outputs, to something that says, gosh, I mean, we've hired great people. We've hired them to do jobs that they are perfectly capable of doing. So let's trust that they do that, and let's trust that they take their accountabilities, and that we go much more by outcomes. And we've seen that in Siemens. We were able to bring the workforce into remote and virtual working very, very quickly. And we've seen a productivity increase, actually. And we've seen more engagement. So what people are telling us is, thank you for the trust, and please keep that up. But let's also discuss empowerment in context with accountability. What is the freedom? What's the framework? How can teams best organize themselves? Because we still want people to come to the office. We want to maximize on the flexibility, but we also want people back in the office for certain things, for certain processes. So I think it requires leadership that is more facilitative, but it also requires all of us to enjoy empowerment, but also step up to taking the accountability. And I think that's hugely important going forward.
You just mentioned accountability and leadership, and I want to focus a little bit on the skills, new skills that we need for the work today and in the future, and try to understand what is Siemens doing to prepare the next generation, in particular in Mexico, to face the challenges that we come in the labor workforce in the future.
Yeah, we do this in Mexico. We do this all around the world. And the two words that we typically use are resilient and relevant. So therefore, trying to plan and trying to control what's coming is one strategy, but it's probably flawed. So helping people find the confidence, the positivity, to know that they can handle with just about anything that comes their way is hugely empowering. The other thing is that we see, particularly in technology functions, that the shelf life of knowledge is going vastly down. We're typically talking about a 5-year shelf life of knowledge. So if you want to have a 45, 50-year career in which your skills are relevant, we need to help our people understand what those relevant skills are and how the world is changing. So we're now working with a methodology that helps sites, functions, countries to work through what do we see? How's the world going to change in the next 3 to 5 years from a capability perspective we need to have as an organization to remain competitive? But how do we then translate that into learning paths for job families, for certain job profiles, and then ultimately for individuals? And we've implemented something very symbolic here as well, which we call the growth talks, which is about really having regular conversations with our people to say, how are you going to continue to learn? What are relevant skills? This is what we see coming. How does that match with your skill set? And the other thing that I think is technology will help us also in that regard. And I think, and I don't know whether that's 3 years away or 5 years away, we will have enough systems, external data, but also internal data and technology that will help say, Judith, people who do your role have recently learned this, or people who are today who were in your role yesterday have made a segue career into something else. So these things come together, and I think they democratize choices. They are empowering, but it demands of companies to provide the infrastructure, to provide the direction, and to give people the space to do the learning.
Judith, we don't have much time, so I'm going to go with the last question. Can you give us an advance of what Siemens is planning for Mexico in the next few years in terms of sustainability?
Yeah, no, we're doing a lot here in Mexico, and we're already very, very far advanced in terms of sustainability in our own operations here in Mexico. But we're very engaged with the country's move to 4.0, digitalization 4.0, Mexico 4.0. Alejandro, our CEO here, is engaged with Concamin, and he actually leads the commission that for digitalization and innovation, which again helps not only big companies, but particularly the small and medium-sized companies with digitalization. And when you do that, I think you have 3 outcomes predominantly. One is you make your business more resilient. You make your business more sustainable because you have means of organizing differently from a decarbon and resource efficiency perspective. But you also make your business more profitable and more future-proof. So in Siemens, we talk about technology with a purpose. And we believe that digitalization is one of those core technologies that has a number of impacts, and sustainability is very clearly one of them. But we also talk sustainability more broadly. We talk planetary, we talk governance, but we also talk people, and we get very engaged from a diversity, equity, and inclusion perspective. There is many programs out there where we get engaged in the education and the vocational training of people. We have just signed an MOU today with the STEM Movimiento today. So we're getting involved also from that perspective in the country to make sure that there is economic development, but also social development, because I think it's planet and people that go hand in hand here.
Thank you so much for your time, Judith, y muchas gracias a nuestra audiencia por habernos acompañado. Buenas noches.